The scent of roasted turkey should have been the first warm thing that welcomed me home that night. Thanksgiving always carried a kind of quiet nostalgia in our house, a tradition stitched together by too many awkward family reunions, too many overcooked pies, and that soft, golden light my mother loved to leave on in the hallway. But instead, I remember the cold. Not the kind that creeps under a jacket or nips at your fingers. No, this cold felt aware, like the air itself knew something was watching. I was carrying the last of the groceries up the porch steps when I heard the crunch of leaves behind me. One deliberate step, then another. Slow, careful, like someone trying not to be noticed. I didn't turn around immediately. Something in me, something old, something instinctive, told me not to. Instead, I kept my voice steady. "If that's you, Uncle Rick, I swear to God I told you dinner's at 6. No answer, only the wind brushing the dead branches above. But the air didn't move, the branches didn't sway, the leaves didn't dance. The silence, after my joke, was too thick, too loaded. Finally, I turned. There was a man standing at the bottom of the steps. Tall, broad-shouldered, clothes torn like he'd been dragged through barbed wire, or worse. His face, there was something off about it, like he hadn't quite learned how to wear it. The features were human, but the expressions didn't fit right, like he was trying them on for the first time. And his eyes, God help me, his eyes were burning amber, not glowing like movie monsters, just catching the porch light in a way that made them look alive in a way no human eye should. "Evening," he said, voice low, hoarse, and trembling around the edges. "Saw your light on, was hoping maybe you had a spare seat." His breath fogged in the air. Not mist, steam, like he was burning up from the inside. Everything in me screamed to shut the door, to tell him the house was full, that he needed to keep walking, keep disappearing into the dark like he was supposed to. But that damn Thanksgiving spirit, that tradition of open doors and warm plates, it grabbed me by the throat. And maybe, deep down, I didn't want to spend another holiday alone, so I forced a smile, one I regretted instantly. Yeah, sure. I mean, it's Thanksgiving. Come on in." His lips twitched, not into a smile, but into something trying to imitate one. The expression pulled, too wide at the corners, too stiff. The muscles seemed to resist it. He stepped up onto the porch, and the wood groaned under his weight. Not the usual squeak of old planks a-strain, like the house itself was whispering a warning. He paused, as if testing the shape of the lie before he chose it. "Colton." His voice wavered on the name, as though it wasn't the one he was born with. I didn't question it. I just stepped aside. The moment he crossed the threshold, every light in the hallway flickered. My mother's old hallway lamp dimmed so low, it was almost a pulse, as if the house exhaled at his arrival, or braced for it. "Smells good," he said, sniffing the air like he wasn't smelling dinner. "But pray." His shoulders tensed, his hands trembled not from cold, but from restraint. That was when I noticed the scratches on his forearm. 4 deep, parallel lines. Perfect spacing, not made by any human hand. I tried to laugh it off. "Rough night." His head tilted toward me, slow, too slow, like a predator adjusting its attention to a noise in the brush. "You could say that," he murmured. "Full moon last night. Roads weren't safe." The back of my neck prickled. I knew the moon had been full. Everyone did. Social media had been buzzing about the hunter's moon, bright enough to burn shadows into the ground. But the way he said it, like he'd been out there beneath it, changing under it, fighting whatever he had become, he stopped walking suddenly, sniffed the air again, and turned toward the living room where the turkey rested on the table. "That for tonight," he asked, voice cracking between hunger and something else. Yeah, I said quietly. Family dinner? He stepped closer. His boots left damp prints on the hardwood. Prints shaped wrong. The heel was there, but the ball of the foot was too wide, and the toe marks pressed deeper than they should have, claw-dash deep. My pulse thudded in my ears. Somewhere far behind me, the oven timer beeped, a cheerful reminder that everything was normal. But nothing about this moment was normal. Colton, if that was even the right name for the thing wearing him, turned to me. His eyes were brighter now, hotter. Thank you, he said, for letting me in. And maybe it was the cold air, maybe it was the flickering light, maybe it was the way his shadow on the wall didn't match his human shape. But I swear the words sounded like something between gratitude and a warning. My mother used to say that Thanksgiving dinner is when people show who they really are. Feed a man, she'd say, and you'll see his truth. If she was still alive, she would have locked the door the moment she saw him. But she wasn't. Here, just me, an overworked kitchen, and the stranger whose footsteps sounded like they belonged to something heavier than a man. I led him toward the dining room. He followed without hesitation. No small talk, no glance at the photos on the walls, just a steady, predatory awareness that made it feel like I was the guest in my own home. The dining table was set for one. I hadn't planned it that way. I'd just stopped bothering with the fantasy that anyone would show up. Colton looked at the single plate, the single glass, the single napkin folded at the center. You weren't expecting company, he said. His tone wasn't accusing. It was curious, like he was trying to figure out what kind of creature I was. Didn't think anyone would come, I admitted. But it's Thanksgiving. Doors stay open. He hummed softly, a sound too deep in the chest for human vocal chords, of resonance that felt like standing too close to A-sub. He pulled out a chair. The wood shrieked under his grip even though he was only holding it lightly. You live alone? He asked. The way he framed it, not do you live alone, but confirmation of his assumption. Yeah, I said carefully. It's just me. His gaze flicked toward the hallway. Are you sure? I nearly dropped the serving spoon before I could respond. The oven timer went off again, too loud, too bright, snapping the tension like a brittle bone. I excused myself and dashed back into the kitchen while carving the turkey. I tried not to think about the way his nostrils had flared at the smell, like he couldn't decide which scent belonged to dinner and which ones belonged to me. The kitchen felt colder now, but not in temperature, in mood, in that ancestral back of the spine instinct that whispers when a predator is close. I carried the platter back into the dining room and placed it in front of him. The bird still steamed. Golden, perfect, the kind of thing anyone would be excited to eat. Colton didn't touch it. He just watched the steam curl upward, like he was waiting for something else. You don't eat turkey, I joked. He blinked, slow. Not usually. He finally picked up the carving knife, not to cut the bird, but to hold it. His fingers turned the handle, testing its weight, its balance. It's sharp, he murmured, almost approvingly. It's for carving, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. He set the knife down, but not gently. The blade thudded into the wood with enough force to leave a mark. Sorry, he said, though I wasn't convinced he knew what sorry meant. I'm not used to tools. Double-quotes, tools, not utensils, not silverware. Tools. My heart, STUTTERED. To cover my nerves, I reached for the turkey leg, ripped a chunk free, and placed it on my own plate. Colton watched every movement, eyes tracking the meat from platter to plate to fork to mouth. You cook well, he said softly. Smells familiar. Familiar how? His jaw tensed. He inhaled slowly as if searching for a memory inside the steam. "Family dinners," he murmured, "before everything changed." The room felt smaller suddenly, as if everything, the walls, the table, the very air, was leaning in to hear the rest of his sentence. "What changed?" I asked. He didn't answer. Instead, he reached for the turkey at Lasnar, the fork, not the knife, but with his bare hand. His fingers dug into the meat like he was tearing into raw flesh. Sinew snapped. Juice dripped down his wrist. He lifted the steaming, half-shredded piece and brought it to his mouth. He didn't chew. He devoured. His jaw moved wrong, too strong, too widened for a heartbeat. The skin around his cheekbones seemed to stretch as something underneath pressed outward. I froze, mid-bite. Colton swallowed hard and wiped his mouth with the back of his hand. The gesture was human. The hunger behind it wasn't. "It's good," he said, though the way he said it suggested he was grading the turkey on some primal scale. "But it's not what I'm used to." "What are you used to?" I asked before I could stop myself. His eyes lifted to mine, amber, burning faintly, pupils just a hair too narrow. He didn't answer with words. He sniffed the air instead. Once, twice, slow, deliberate inhales. My throat tightened. "You smell nervous," he murmured. "I'm not," I lied. He tilted his head. Humans always say that when they're lying. I gripped the edge of the table, fighting the urge to run. "Colton," I said carefully, "you're making me uncomfortable." "I don't mean to," he replied, genuinely, almost sadly. But then, he added, "It's hard to hold everything in." The lights flickered again. His shadow on the wall stretched longer than his body, broader in the shoulders before snapping back as if caught doing something it shouldn't. I swallowed hard. "What exactly are you holding in?" I whispered. He opened his mouth to answer and stopped, not because he changed his mind, but because something outside growled, low, long, close. A sound that didn't belong to any animal I knew. A sound that made every hair on my arms rise. Colton's eyes widened, not with fear, but recognition. He stood up so fast, the chair slammed backward. "They found me," he whispered. Then he turned to the window, eyes blazing, and, for the first time, I saw the shape beneath the skin. Not a man, a wolf, struggling to stay hidden at my Thanksgiving table. There are certain sounds a house should never make. Whined, sure, creaking floorboards, fine, branches tapping the siding, tradition, even. But what clawed across my dining room window that night wasn't wind, and it sure as hell wasn't a branch. The first scrape was long and deliberate, like a fingernail or a talon dragged slowly across the glass. Colton's head snapped toward it before I even processed what was happening. He wasn't startled. He wasn't confused. He was listening. Listening like something on the other side was speaking a language only he understood. "Stay here," he said. But the way he said it, his voice was cracking down the center, splitting between something human and something ancient, trying to surface. I didn't stay. I moved beside him slowly. Stupidly, because instinct sometimes means walking straight into danger just to prove you're not prey. The air was thick with tension, a pressure that made the back of my skull throb. "What was that?" I whispered. He didn't answer, didn't even blink. His nostrils flared, catching whatever scent the wind carried through the cracks in the window frame. Another scrape. Shorter this time, testing. Searching. Then a low, guttural sound half growled across the porch, vibrating the window pane. Colton closed his eyes, jaw clenched. "They tracked me." "Tracked you? Who tracked you?" He finally turned, and the look on his face, No human expression had ever carried that much grief and rage in the same breath. "My kind," he said softly. "They don't let anyone leave." 1,000 questions slammed into my skull at once, but only one made it out. "You said leave. What did you leave?" He opened his mouth to respond, and the window behind him exploded inward. Shards of glass burst across the table like icy shrapnel. I ducked beneath the table instinctively while Colton didn't flinch at all. Something massive lunged halfway through the window, a snout, wide and snarling, amber eyes burning through the dark claws, hooked around the fractured frame, muscles trembling with hunger and fury. It wasn't fully transformed yet. The muzzle was elongated, but patches of human skin clung to the cheeks. The teeth were too big for the mouth, crowding each other. Its breathing was ragged, the throat shifting between growls and something like speech. Colton stepped in front of me, not protectively, not aggressively, resignedly, like he'd been waiting for this moment. The creature snarled something guttural, something I didn't understand. But Colton did. He responded in the same language, shorter, harsher, his voice cracking in a way that made the hairs on my arms stand up. "What are you saying?" I asked. He didn't look back. "They want me to return," he said. "To finish what I started." The creature at the window slammed its claw against the frame again, hard enough to crack the wood this time. A warning, a promise. "I can't go back," Colton whispered. "Not after what they made me do." "What did they?" The creature lunged again, forcing half its body through the opening, ripping more glass and wood aside. Dust rained from the ceiling. Plates rattled. The turkey platter slid and hit the floor with a wet slap. Colton's hands curled into fists. And for the first time, I heard it. A sound rising in his chest. A low rumble, too deep for a man. His pupils thinned, sharpening to slits. The skin at his temples rippled. His teeth pressed against the inside of his lips, threatening to break through. "No," he growled at himself. "Not here, not yet." But the creature was already halfway into the house. Its shoulders cracked loudly as bones shifted and skin stretched, forcing its way inside. I scrambled backward on hands and heels until my back hit the wall. My heart hammered against my ribs, trying to escape before anything else did. The creature's eyes snapped to me. It inhaled deeply. Slowly, Colton roared. Not human, not remotely human. A furious, guttural bellow that shook the table legs and sent the remaining glass shards skittering across the floor. The beast at the window stopped. Its head twisted toward him. Recognition. Challenge. Get down, Colton. Snarled. It did, because the thing that turned toward the window wasn't the stranger I'd invited inside. It was something fighting the edge of its own skin, something twice as tall as the man I'd met. Muscles rolling beneath flesh that barely contained them. He wasn't transforming all the way. Not yet. But he was out of the shallow end of humanity and sinking fast. The creature lunged at him, slashing toward his throat. Colton caught its wrist with one hand. One hand, the impact shook dust from the ceiling and rattled the light fixture. Their eyes locked, and a kind of silent war passed between them. Colton turned his head slightly toward me. "Run, I'm not leaving you. Run." His voice wasn't human anymore. It didn't ask. It commanded. Something inside me older than fear, older than instinct obeyed. I pushed myself to my feet, stumbling backward into the hallway as Colton and the intruder crashed into the dining table. Wood snapped, meat and dishes flew. Something growled, something screamed. I ran down the hallway, past the photos on the wall, past the lamp that flickered like it knew exactly what was happening. Behind me, another sound split the air, the unmistakable crack of bone. Then another, and another dot, not from the creature, from Colton. He was changing, fully, violently, unwillingly. And I realized then the thing at the window wasn't hunting me. It was hunting him. And whatever he'd run from was now tearing its way through my house. The hallway felt longer than it had any right to be. In every family home, there's a moment where a familiar place becomes foreign, where the photos on the walls stop being memories and start feeling like eyes, watching, waiting, hoping you'll make it to the end before the thing chasing you stops holding back. I sprinted forward, stumbling into the shadows, desperately trying to reach the back door. My socks skidded across the hardwood. My breath hitched. Behind me, the dining room erupted into a nightmare. First came the roar, not from the intruder, from Colton of his. Earlier Grell had sounded like a warning. This was a declaration, the kind of primal fury that comes from a creature realizing it has nothing left to hide and nothing left to lose. The walls vibrated with it. I swear the old family portraits rattled. Then came the crack. No, not one. A cascade. Bones popping out of place, only to snap into new positions. Skin tightening, stretching, tearing, reforming. Fibers of muscle thickening under impossible pressure. I reached the end of the hallway, the back door just steps away, when the sound shifted from transformation to violence. Glass shattered again, something heavy slammed into the wall. Plaster exploded like chalk, dust, and then a scream. Wet, sharp, filled with ripping. Not human, not animal. Something stuck between I made the mistake of looking back, just for a second, but that was enough. The dining room was obliterated, the table gutted, the walls dented like fists. No claws had punched through them. And in the center of it all, framed by flickering light and swirling dust, I saw the shape of the thing that had been Colton. He wasn't standing anymore. He towered a silhouette of impossible mass, back hunched, shoulders exploding outward with fur in jagged patches, his arms longer now, bulkier ended, in hands that were no longer hands. Not fully, not human, not wolf. Something in between, flexing and contracting like they couldn't quite decide what form to hold. His head jerked to the side, jaw snapping open as the bone elongated mid-roar. Teeth pushed outward like knives escaping sheaths. His neck thickened until veins pulsed like ropes. I'd seen werewolf drawings, movies, myths. Nothing prepared me for something caught in the process, half-dash formed, half-controlled, half-willing. The intruder, the other creature, lay pinned under him, snarling and thrashing. Its own transformation had stopped in shock. It had expected a fight with a runaway. It hadn't expected a monster in full bloom. Colton's claws tore into its shoulder. A sound like wet fabric ripping open echoed through the room. The creature shrieked and raked its talons across Colton's flank, leaving gushes that closed almost immediately. Knitting together as steam rose from the wounds, Colton lifted the creature by the throat, one-handed, and slammed it into the cabinet. Hard enough to knock plates from the shelves, they shattered around them like porcelain snow. The intruder choked out a guttural phrase in that strange language again, half growl, half human speech. It was a plea, a warning, maybe even a curse. Colton didn't care. He leaned down, muzzle elongating further, teeth rearranging themselves with sickening cracks. His eyes, oh God, they weren't amber anymore. They were silver, bright enough to reflect the kitchen light in a way that made them look almost alive on their own. Stop, I shouted, my voice cracking. I don't know why I yelled. He wasn't going to stop. Not now. Not when his instincts had taken the wheel and ripped the steering column out. But the roar died in his throat, just for a second. Just long enough for him to glance barely in my direction. That single second saved the intruder's life. It twisted its body violently and sank its claws into Colton's ribs. using the leverage to shove him back. Colton staggered, snarled, and dove after it, but the creature slipped past him, half crawling, half running through the broken window frame. Colton roared and charged after it. I bolted to the back door. My fingers fumbled with the latch, shaking so badly I could barely grip the handle. Behind me, Colton tore through the living room, his claws gouging deep trenches into the hardwood as he pursued the fleeing wolf creature. I heard the screen door rip off its hinges as the intruder burst into the backyard. I heard Colton follow, the sound of his massive form colliding with the frame so hard the house shuddered. I wrenched the lock open and flung myself outside just in time to see them. 2 half-wolves, half-men ripping across the backyard under the pale winter moon. Colton tackled the intruder near the tree line, the impact sending up a spray of dirt and leaves. They rolled, snarling, biting, clawing, each blow landing with the force of a small car crash. Trees bent under their weight. Branches snapped like brittle bones. The intruder twisted suddenly, raking its claws across Colton's face. Silver blood, or something like it, sprayed the air. Colton responded by grabbing its muzzle and slamming its face into the ground so hard the soil cratered. The creature whimpered. Actually whimpered, Colton. I shouted without thinking. Both creatures froze. The intruder looked at me first. Eyes wild, frantic, desperate. Colton turned slower, much slower. And in that moment, I understood the terror of prey caught between 2 predators. One wounded, one enraged, and both deciding what to do with the human dumb enough to shout a name. Colton's head lowered, shoulders rising, breath fogging the air in thick, heavy plumes. His pupils narrowed to razor slits. His chest heaved like a furnace. He wasn't looking at the other creature anymore. He was looking at me, and I knew then whatever humanity he'd held on to, whatever restraint he'd kept, whatever promise he'd made himself to not harm me, it was slipping. Fast, the intruder scrambled to its feet and bolted into the woods, vanishing into the dark. Colton didn't follow. He stood over the torn-up ground, chest rising and falling, staring at me like a starving man staring at a meal he never meant to touch. And then, in a voice shredded by fangs and fur, he managed one word: run. The word run isn't always a command. Sometimes it's a confession. Sometimes it's the last scrap of someone's humanity clawing up through the dark, begging you to listen before something ancient takes the wheel. That's how he said it, not as a threat, not as a warning, as a plea. But the second the sound left his throat, his entire body lurched forward, like the word itself had snapped a chain inside him. I ran, my feet tore across the backyard, slipping over patches of frost that had melted all day. The cold air cleaved into my lungs. My breath burned, every muscle felt electric with panic. Behind me, the ground shook as Colton moved, not lightly, not cautiously, but like something that had forgotten how to walk on 2 legs and was relearning speed in real time. The fence blurred past my vision. I vaulted it without thinking, a messy, desperate leap that scraped my palms raw. I landed hard on the other side, stumbled, caught myself, and darted toward the tree line. The woods swallowed me instantly. Black trunks, dead branches, a forest floor littered with cold leaves and secrets. I weaved between trees, ducking under branches, hearing the pulse of my own heartbeat crack my skull open from the inside. Behind me, I heard him. Not words, not roars, but the thud, thud, thud of something massive running on all 4s. Something that should not have fit through the back door, but did. Something breathing in, heavy, ravenous bursts. I didn't dare look back. Instead, I veered sharply to the left, letting instinct guide me. The ground dipped. My foot snagged on a root. My body pitched forward, face slamming into the cold earth. For a moment, everything was dizzy, muffled, fractured dot. I pushed myself up, mud streaking my face, breath wheezing between clenched teeth. Then I heard him stop, not far behind me, close, too close. Branches cracked, leaves shifted, something exhaled a heart. Steaming breath that drifted past the back of my neck. I froze. Slowly, stupidly, I turned. Colton was there, towering, shaking, half wolf, half man, fully wrong. His body rippled with strain, muscles contracting and bulging beneath skin that barely contained them. His fur was patchy, black streaks cutting through human skin like claws raking through clay. His hands were twisted into clawed instruments of instinct, shaking as if fighting invisible restraints. And his face, God, his face was a battlefield. One eye human blue, terrified. The other a molten silver slit of moon-made hunger. He looked at me like he knew me, then like he didn't. Then like he envied the fact that I still had a choice. "Don't," he rasped, voice tearing itself apart. "Don't make me choose." I stepped backward instinctively, and his entire posture snapped forward like a spring pulled too tight. He dug his claws into the ground, anchoring himself there so hard the earth split around them. Steam hissed from his skin. His jaw elongated another inch, bones shifting audibly, grinding like someone crushing glass underfoot. "Colton," I whispered, "you're fighting it. You can fight," he roared. Not at me, at the sky. A howl choked by a man's failing voice, a sound of agony, fury, and transformation colliding so violently that the trees themselves seemed to vibrate in sympathy. The sound shattered me. He slammed his head into a tree trunk, splitting the bark. Then again, harder. Splinters flew like shrapnel. His shoulder hit the trunk next. A blow strong enough to crack the wood. He was hurting himself to keep himself from hurting me. But the moon, God help us, the moon was rising above the tree line, full bright, watching, and the mote, silver in his eye, ignited. He whimpered a sound no werewolf myth ever prepared me for. Then he spoke one more time, barely human. "Go." I bolted again, pushing deeper into the forest. This time he didn't hesitate. He came after me, faster than before, more sure-footed, more beast than man. His claws ripped into the soil behind me, tearing the earth into trenches as he bounded between trees. His breathing grew heavier, deeper, rhythmic, a hunter's breath. Branches whipped my face. Roots tore at my ankles. The night folded around me like a dark mouth. A beam of moonlight cut through the canopy pale, sharp, merciless, and I saw my own shadow stretch out on the forest floor. Colton's shadow fell over it, huge, woven, stretching upward like a nightmare unbound. I burst into a clearing, a shallow dip surrounded by tall pines. The moonlight pooled like silver water across the clearing floor. I slid to a stop. Colton didn't. He crashed into the clearing at full speed, skidding across the dirt, claws carving deep scars into the earth as he fought momentum. He swung his body around to face me, breath steaming in heavy, desperate clouds. For a long moment, neither of us moved. Then he stood up, not fully, not gracefully. But he rose onto two legs, towering, trembling, a silhouette of violence and grief. His chest expanded, his head tilted back, his jaws parted, and he howled, a deep, sorrowful, earth-shaking sound that rolled across the clearing like thunder. It wasn't a threat, it wasn't a claim, it was a warning to me, to the woods, to everything with ears. The intruder wasn't the only one coming. Something else was hunting him. Something worse, something older, and it had followed its runaway straight to me. He lowered his head slowly, and the final slip of humanity drained from his eyes. "Run," he said again, but this time the voice belonged to the monster wearing his skin. There's a moment in every nightmare where the world stops pretending, where the shadows don't hide things, they introduce them, where the silence isn't empty, it's listening. And in that clearing, bathed in cold moonlight, I felt the forests lean in, hungry to witness what came next. Colton didn't move, not at first. He stood there trembling, claws sunk deep into the soil, breath dragging in and out of his chest like each inhale was a battle he was losing. The transformation had nearly overtaken him, but not fully. Not yet. He was fighting for inches of control and losing one heartbeat at a time. The silver in his eyes flickered like a dying light. And then the woods answered his howl. It started with a single sound, a soft crunch of leaves somewhere behind me, too deliberate to be the wind, too heavy to be human. I spun around, nothing, then another, off my right shoulder. Closer. A low murmur rolled through the underbrush, a whisper made of hot breath and sharper teeth. Then another, left side this time, slower, heavier. A creature pacing just out of sight, letting me hear it breathe. And then a fourth, behind Colton, a soft, guttural exhale that vibrated the clearing. We weren't alone. We were surrounded. Colton growled low in his chest, a sound that felt like the foundation of the earth itself, groaning under strain. His body shifted subtly, feet widening, shoulders lowering, claws flexing, the stance of a creature preparing to fight on all sides. But something was wrong. He wasn't growling at them. He was growling at me. "Colton," I whispered, backing step by step toward the center of the clearing. "Don't do this." His head twitched at the sound of his name. A hitch, a stutter, like the last human neuron in his skull was sparking, trying to fire a warning through the flood of instinct drowning it. His jaw snapped open, teeth glinting like silver daggers, breath steaming in the moonlight. His muscles coiled. He was losing, fast. Then the forest broke open. A pair of glowing amber eyes appeared between two pines, another pair directly across the clearing, a third pair to my left, a fourth to my right. The circle closed. 4 shapes stepped out from the trees, all towering, all hulking, all in different stages of transformation, some more human, some more wolf, all wrong. Their fur glinted under the moonlight in colors I didn't think nature allowed. Black streaked with rust red, grey patched with pale silver scars, white fur stained dark around the muzzle, one with a broken jaw that never set correctly, hanging slightly askew, and every one of them had the same eyes, cold, hunting, claiming. One of them growled something, the same guttural language the intruder had spoken earlier, a command, a demand. Colton snarled in response, stepping between me and the nearest pair of eyes. His claws dug into the dirt so hard the soil trembled. "You left us," one of them growled, the words broken, stretched by the shape of its mouth. "You broke the hunt," another answered. "You belong to the moon. You don't get to walk away." A third. "You brought the scent to a human house." Their voices. I'd never imagined a werewolf could speak, or that speech could sound like that, shredded half elf, half man, completely nightmare. Colton shuddered violently, like each word from his pack hit him like a physical blow. His body arched backward, bones shifting again, fur spreading across his skin in violent bursts. His humanity wasn't just slipping, it was being ripped out of him by proximity to the pack. Then the leader stepped forward. He was larger than the others by a full head. His fur was midnight black, streaked with silver scars that looked burned into him rather than earned through battle. His eyes weren't amber, they were icy blue, glowing with a cold intelligence that made my blood run colder than the wind ever could. He tilted his head at Colton like a disappointed father. "You ran from us," the leader growled. "And for what? A place at a human table?" Colton snapped his jaws, a thick, guttural sound bubbling from deep in his throat. "He tried," the leader said. "He always tries. This one tries to pretend he's not what he is." Then his gaze locked onto me, and every inch of my body froze. "You fed him," the leader said. "A dangerous kindness." I stumbled backward. He followed, slowly, deliberately, like he enjoyed watching prey learn it was prey. Colton surged forward with a roar, placing himself directly between the leader and me. His claws sliced the ground, carving deep trenches. He bared his teeth and snapped at the leader's throat. The pack snarled. The leader didn't. He simply raised one clawed hand and pressed it against Colton's chest. Not pushing, not striking, just touching. Colton's single quotes, his entire body spasmed. His legs buckled. He collapsed to one knee, snarling, clawing at the leader's arm, but unable to break free. "He's still young," the leader murmured. "He forgets the moon speaks louder than he does." Colton roared, but the leader's grip tightened, claws sinking into fur and flesh. "He's ours." My throat closed. The air froze in my lungs. I took a step without realizing I'd moved at all. "Stop," I begged. "Please." The leader's head snapped in my direction, so fast the sound cracked the air. "You want him?" he growled, voice colder than the moonlight. "Then smell what he is." He shoved Colton forward. Colton staggered, catching himself on clawed hands, chest heaving like a dying thing gasping for breath. He lifted his head slowly, and his eyes, both of them now fully silver, locked on mine. He didn't recognize me anymore, not the way a man knows a friend, not the way a stranger knows a savior. He recognized me the way a wolf recognizes something warm and bleeding in the dark. The leader whispered one final line. "Finish what the moon began." Colton lunged, not at the pack, at me. Colton didn't just lunge, he unleashed. One moment he was a trembling half-beast, fighting the tide inside him. The next, the moon seized every bone, every breath, every instinct. He sprang across the clearing with the kind of velocity that doesn't belong to mortal creatures. His claws hit the ground so hard dirt erupted in a spray behind him. His jaws split wide, teeth wet, silver eyes empty of everything except hunger, and he was coming for me. "I'd like to tell you," I stood my ground, "that I was brave, that I remembered every survival instinct I'd ever read online or whispered to myself during sleepless nights. But I did the only honest thing a human does when a werewolf commits to the kill. I ran, my feet launched backwards so fast I didn't feel the impact of the ground. My vision blurred. Branches whipped my arms and face. My lungs became fire and knives. Behind me, the thunder of a monster gaining ground. Not walking, not stalking, bearing down on me like a storm made of muscle and moonlight. A tree branch snapped overhead as something enormous crashed through it, showering me with splinters. I stumbled, slid, caught myself on a stump, and kept running through instinct alone. But instinct doesn't outrun a werewolf. He was closing, 5 strides, 4, 3. I could feel his breath hot, metallic, brushing the back of my collar, and then a roar tore through the clearing that didn't belong to Colton. The pack. They weren't cheering him on. They weren't waiting. They were charging, tearing through the trees in a thunderous circle, their snarls rising in a crescendo. Not hunting me, though they wouldn't have minded the snack, but hunting him. Their runaway, the traitor, the beast who dared try to live at a human table. Colton spun mid-charge, instincts jerking him toward the greater threat behind him. His claws slashed the air, catching only bark as he dodged the first wolf that leapt past me. The second wolf barreled into him, tackling him sideways into the dirt. Fur and skin tore in snarling tangles. The ground shook under their impact, leaves swirling like dying sparks. I ducked behind a fallen log, gasping, watching the pack pile onto him. 4 against 1, teeth flashing, claws carving, bodies snapping against each other like breaking branches. Colton roared, a sound like the sky ripping open. He hurled one wolf off his back, another sank its teeth into his shoulder. A third raked claws across his ribs until silver blood sprayed like hot mist. The leader stepped forward last. He didn't rush. He didn't bite. He just waited, calm, patient, for the others too. Wear Colton down, and they did. One by one they retreated, panting, watching. Colton staggered to his feet, blood steaming from a dozen wounds. His breath came in ragged bursts. His form flickered fur, retreating, returning, fighting the moon's demands. He swayed, and the leader stepped in. Enough, he growled. Colton lifted his head, trembling, eyes barely focusing. You chose wrong, the leader murmured. The moon doesn't break for a human dinner table. The leader lunged, but Colton, even half transformed, half dead, still had something left. He caught the leader's jaw mid-strike. Claws sank into flesh. Blood, dark, hot, splattered across the clearing. The leader howled, twisting violently, throwing Colton backward. The impact shook the earth. Colton hit a tree trunk, the crack of ribs echoing like a gunshot. He slid down to one knee. The leader approached him slowly. You'll die for this, the leader said. But not before you remember who you were born to hunt. He raised one razor-sharp claw. Colton's voice barely human, barely a whisper crawled through the cold. Not him. Then the claw fell, but not on me. On Colton's own chest, where he shoved the leader's arm upward with every ounce of strength left inside. They grappled, legs digging into the dirt, bodies twisting. The leader snarled and drove him backward, step by step toward the torn-up ground of the clearing. Colton's breath faltered. His strength evaporated. His knees buckled. And then with a single, ragged gasp, he thrust his claws into the leader's side. The leader reeled, eyes wide with shock, giving Colton the opening he'd sacrificed himself for. Run. He roared, this time fully. Werewolf, fully moonborn, fully doomed. I fled, not because I wanted to, because Colton had just given the only thing he had left, his death, to keep me alive. The pack howled behind me, the sound stretching across the woods like a falling star's scream. Whether they were mourning him or hunting me, I didn't want to know. I didn't stop running until my house reappeared through the trees, shattered, torn apart, dying under moonlight like a wounded animal itself. I didn't stop until I was inside, slamming the door, gasping. I didn't sleep that night, or the next, or the next. By dawn, the clearing was empty. No blood, no bodies, no sign of a pack or a traitor. Only footprints, massive, clawed, leading into the woods and stopping where the shadows swallowed their trail. Colton was gone, or maybe he never left. Maybe the woods keep what they take. But every Thanksgiving since, just as the moon rises and the turkey cools on the table, I hear a single claw drag across my window. Long, slow, remembering, and every year the scratching stops the moment I whisper, Happy Thanksgiving, Colton. Then the night moves on, and something huge fades back into the woods, waiting for the next full moon.